When I came to Bethlehem in the January of 1980, my candidating message was taken from Philippians 1:25 and context. And the point of it was to argue that when Paul wrestled with whether he was going to die or was going to live and serve, he didn't know which to choose if he had the preference. And he concluded, said, my desire is to depart and be with Christ, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I am sure that I will remain and continue with you all. And then he added his reason. For your progress and joy of faith. And that text had taken me years before. It's just amazing. Here's one of the most gigantic figures in the world, an intellectual mountain, and someone who had suffered so deeply. And he was saying, my reason for being willing to stay on the planet and prefer it is to make you happy. Is that okay to paraphrase it like that? For your advancement and joy of faith. This is not any merely worldly kind of happiness. This is a joy in Christ. And I told the people in that sermon, that's why I would come if you would have me. I'm coming to make you glad. It may cost you your life, but I want to be an apostolic pastor. I want to do what the apostles did. And the other text I quoted was just quoted, 2 Corinthians 1:24. Not that I lord it over your faith, but I am a worker with you for your joy. So you have Philippians 1:25 and you have 2 Corinthians 1:24, both of which say the apostolic passion was to make people glad in God. And I just found that, what a thing to live for. Now, in the context of Philippians, it's pretty clear why that is such a big deal for Paul. Namely, the glory of Christ is at stake in whether you have the joy of faith in Him. So it might be helpful to look at that for just 2 or 3 minutes to see how seminal verses 20 and 21 are for my understanding of the relevance or the importance of joy as the goal of the pastoral ministry in your people's lives. This is not buying into any particular psychological orientation in ministry. This is buying straight into an exegetical conclusion about how joy relates to the majesty of Jesus. Okay? So we're at Philippians chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. It goes like this. It is my eager expectation and hope that I shall not at all be ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. Now just let this sink in. He is saying, my eager expectation, my hope. So he's in prison in Rome, and this is his passion, right down to the final day. My passion is that Christ will be magnified. Might be honored in your text. I like the Greek megaluno, megalunthesetai. That just sounds so good. Mega. I want Christ to be mega in the world. You want Christ to be mega in Hawaii, right? That's what it's about. We want people to look at him and say, that's awesome. That's it. That's the end of my quest. That's my treasure. That's my God. That's my Lord. That's my all. That's what we want these islands to say. So that's what Paul is saying. That's what I live for. I want Christ to be magnified in my body. That means everything I do in this flesh, whether I live or whether I die. Now, the next verse starts with the word for, which is going to explain how could it be that in his life and in his death, Christ would be magnified. This is the exegetical inference that I'm going to draw out, is contained in that word for. For, to me, to live is Christ. Now that corresponds to whether by life, and to die is gain, and that corresponds to by death. So I want Christ to be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. And then he takes those two and he explains how that would be, how that would happen. In the case of life, life is Christ. And in the case of death, death is gain. And I just thought and thought and thought. This is about 45 years ago. I just thought and thought, how does that work? How does the death pair work? Let's just leave out the life pair and do the death pair. My passion is that Christ would be magnified in my life by death, in my body by death. For to me to die is gain. Now that's worth about an hour's reflection or a life. How does that work? How is Christ shown to be magnificent in Paul's body? Because when his body is killed by Nero, he exudes gain. And he gives the answer in verse 23, where it says, my desire is to depart and be with Christ. So when Paul thought death, he thought, oh, good, at home with Jesus. And that's why it's gain. So in death, you lose Hawaii. You lose health. You lose family. You lose the plans for the future. You lose the earth. And what you get is Christ. And you put those in the balance, so lose everything this world has to offer for the rest of your life. Put it in the balance on this side. Put new sight and fellowship and intimacy with Jesus over here. And Paul says, gain. And at that moment, who looks magnificent in his life? Jesus does. And that was the key to my whole life. I mean, that's the key to every book I've ever written, every sermon I've ever preached is rooted in that connection between gain and glory. The glory of Jesus and my gain. The glory of Jesus and my gain. If he's my gain, he looks glorious. And this message is simply adding, especially when you're suffering. All the more when you're suffering. Pretty easy to look like he's your gain when all's well. You know, it's all coming from Jesus. Thank you, thank you. And nobody's impressed with that. Nobody. But if you lose it all, if you're in the hospital, tubes everywhere, a few minutes of consciousness left, family around you, and you smile up at your kids, and they say, don't want you to go, Daddy. And you say, it's going to be okay. He's God. And for me, gain. I tell you, those kids would have to be as hard as nails not to see who looks great in that moment. Jesus looks really great to Daddy. So it's pretty clear to me why joy is important to Paul. Nothing makes Christ look more magnificent in your life when he is more precious to you, more satisfying to you than anything. And all the behaviors that flow from that, which are risk to the max, for him. I'm not going to say the word risk too many times in this message, but I saw one title, Joy in Suffering. I saw another title, Joy in Risk and Suffering. So I wasn't sure what my title was. It's really the same message, but let me say a word about risk. And then you'll see how all the rest of it relates to risk without talking about it. God can't risk. I hate the book that's titled God Risks or anything approaching that. The reason he can't risk is because he's not ignorant of anything, and the only way you can be risky is to be ignorant of what's coming. If you know what's coming, you're not risking, you're just either foolish or courageous. Risk always assumes ignorance. I don't know what's coming, I'm going to risk it anyway. They might kill me, they might not kill me. I'm going. That's risk. God never says might. So put that aside. God never risks. We do a lot, in the sense that we don't know what choices we make are going to cost us. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Now, I think that the more important the issue, the bigger the risk you should take. And the smaller the issue, the less risk you should take. I don't think you should jump off the temple to impress the devil. I'll give you a little tip here. This is going to offend some of you to the max. I'm not going to hang glide, and I'm not going to jump out of an airplane with a parachute for fun. To save your life, I would do it. To reach the lost, I would do it. But for fun, I'm not going to do it. I think it's crazy. So no offense to all you crazy people, but why would I risk my life for fun? I mean, fun is not worth risking your life for. Jesus is. Love is. Fun is not. That's crazy. That's jumping off the temple. But I won't go any further because I don't want to be judgmental. Very, anyway. So you get the idea of what I mean by risk. I don't want you to go out and jump off a cliff, for goodness sakes. Some of them might say, hey, more people are killed in car accidents than hang gliding. You drive a car? I say, well, not for fun. I go places. I've got important things to do. I don't get my car. I'll just go have fun. Some people do. I know some people do, but enough on risk. I really believe in risk. I wrote a book called Risk is Right, and this is all about risk without naming it. I really want to talk about suffering and its relationship to how joy in suffering makes Jesus look good. That's the thesis, okay? So the principle we've developed so far from Philippians 1, 20 and 21 is that Paul magnifies Christ by counting Christ gain when he loses everything else. And that's the principle behind joy in suffering. And oh, how Paul suffered. John Piper doesn't have much experiential right, like our brother Hoy. I don't have much experiential right to say what I say. If I don't say just what the Bible says, you shouldn't pay any attention to me because I have not suffered much. But Paul had more than anybody in this room, bar none. Just take one example from 2 Corinthians 11:24, where he was listing his sufferings, and there were 3 times beaten with rods and countless imprisonments. Imagine being in prison so many times you can't remember how many. If I was in once, you'd hear about it in every testimony. I would talk about my time in prison. And Paul was in prison so many times he couldn't even remember. But here's the one that grips me. He said, 5 times have I been whipped with 39 lashes. Okay, just pause. These leather straps, maybe with little shells embedded in them, with or without, when 39 lashes is done by people who hate you, your back is jelly. That's once. What, would take several months probably for it completely to heal? It happened again, same back. A month or two to heal, scar tissue growing. It happened a third time. Take another month, 2 months, maybe it doesn't even heal anymore. Maybe that was just thorn in the flesh. My back never heals. Fourth time. Fifth time. Walter Wangerin wrote a novel called Paul, and in it there's a chapter called The Back. And it's all imaginary, but man, did it make it live for me. He's an old man in this chapter, and he wakes up, he has a servant girl who is serving him in this location where he is. He can't move. He can't move. The flesh has overgrown and entangled itself so much he cannot move. And she kneads him like dough with oil before he gets out of bed so that he can stand up. I don't know if that's how it was, but my point is, Paul has a right to talk to us. He does. I don't. He does. If I speak his word, listen to me. If I don't listen to me. I love this man. I love Paul very much. I love him more than Jonathan Edwards. If I had to choose, Paul. No doubt about it. What an amazing man. Joy is central in his ministry. I'm staying on the planet for your joy. I work with you for your joy. Why? Because when you are joyful in Jesus, and now I'm going to add, in the midst of suffering, he looks really good. Oh, how he looks good in your life. And I'm all about Jesus looking great. That's why I live. I want Jesus to be magnified. That's why joy has such a key place in the ministry. So, joy is central for the sake of the glory of Christ. It is most effective in its witness character when we are suffering. Now here's a controversial claim, and I'll show people who don't like it and let them talk, and then I'll give you the text that caused me to assume it or believe it because it's in the Bible. I want to argue that God appoints, pick your verb, ordain, bring about, lead into, cause. That's the offensive one. God appoints our suffering so that he would look great in our sustained joy in him through suffering. Philippians 1:29, it has been given to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe, that's a gift, but also suffer for his sake. It's a gift. It has been granted to you, given to you by God, that you should suffer for his sake.